Hi and welcome to OTR Miniatures. Today I'm going to be painting skeletons. More accurately, I'm going to be finishing the vampire count skeletons that I started in the very first video on this channel, which was all the way back in January last year when I looked like this. Welcome to OTR Miniatures. This is a skeleton I painted in that video. It was the first mini I'd painted in at least 15 years. I had a few issues with dried up paints in the starter set I bought at the same time as the skeletons, so I ended up using some cheap acrylic paints I had. Overall I was pretty happy with how it turned out. Thank you if you were one of the few people that did watch that first video. Right, let's see how far I've got with them and then we can carry on and get them finished. The next day I painted a second skeleton after watching a few tutorials on YouTube. I did a lighter bone colour and added more highlights and a wash. I was very pleased with the improvement in just one day. Again, thanks to everyone that watched that video. For the third skeleton, I did a bit of experimenting with different paints and techniques and ended up with this. The paint job for this skeleton was largely inspired by the Army of the Dead from the Lord of the Rings. At the time of painting this, it was probably the most detailed figure I'd ever done, so I was really happy with how it turned out. That was at the end of February last year. And for the fourth skeleton, which is the final completed one, and the last one that I did a video for, I did this. I did continue with the other skeletons a little bit, and I have some clips that I recorded at the time, so I'll put them in now. I really liked the paint recipe for the last skeleton that I did, so I've assembled all of the rest of the horde now, and I'm just going to batch paint them. So I'm going to start by base coating all of them in the Corax white, and then we'll come back and I'll show you the close-up of painting the musician. Been through and I've base coated all of the skeletons now, so I won't keep repeating that. All of them just have 2 layers of Corax white. This one I'm going to start with the bone colour first and then do the brown wash over. Like I said, I just want to compare it to the last skeleton to see which I prefer. This is how the skeleton looks after painting the bone colour on and then doing the flesh shade over the top. I'm really happy with this compared to the last skeleton. The shadows are a lot darker. I think what I'm going to do is go back over and dry brush with the bone colour again just to really boost the highlights. And then also on this one, because I'm running low on the bone colour, what I did was painted this skull on the top of the horn with what I believe is Xandri dust, and then just dry brush that over again with the same colour, just with a bit of white mixed in, which has turned out a colour that I really like. So I think for the rest of the skeletons, I think that I might be using that. As I said when I was painting the horn blower, I was going to try the Xandri dust and then do the Reikland flesh shade over the top of that, dry brush it with the Xandri dust again, and this is how it's turned out. I also, after dry brushing it once with the Xandri dust, did it another 2 times. So Xandri dust on its own dry brush was quite a heavy dry brush, and then I did a medium dry brush when I just mixed half and half of the Xandri dust with white, and then I did a light dry brush just on where the highest of the highlights was going to be, with would have been a 75% white, 25% Xandri dust, and this is how it's turned out. Of all the recipes that I've tried on the skeletons, this is my favourite, so this is the one that I'm going to batch paint the rest with. So that's where we're up to at present, so now we can continue and get all of these finished.
So this is the skeleton that I was going to paint next, before I got caught up in all the other projects. Let's carry on by starting with the horn that he's carrying. Right, so I want it to look like a brass instrument, but I'm a bit limited on paints here at the moment. So I'm going to use Retributor Armour, Mithril Silver, Lead Belcher, and Reikland Flesh Shade, and see what I can come up with. And then I may add some patina using some Nailac Oxide. So I'll just begin by adding a base of the Retributor Armour, and then we'll begin aging it from there. Right, so we just add a base coat of this all over the horn. We'll be careful of the bones that we've already painted, but as for the rest of it, it doesn't really matter about being 100% neat at this point. We'll be going over everything else anyway. I'm completely off camera. I still haven't figured this out for the painting yet because I haven't really done any tutorials. Eventually, when I get a proper camera, may get a proper setup and do some actual painting tutorials if I get any good at it. Right, for now I'll just continue and I'll show you what it looks like when it's finished. Right, so that's the base coat of Retributor armor done, and I'm just experimenting with this. So now I'm just going to add a all over wash of Reikland Flesh Shade. As I said, I'm going to go all over that now with the Reikland Flesh Shade. I'll attempt to get it on camera for you. Right, so that's Reikland Flesh Shade done. Let's leave that to dry and see how it turns out. That is now dry and I quite like the look of it. So what I'm going to do now is mix in some of the Mithril Silver with the Retributor armor and just add some highlights. So the light source that I've done on the previous 4 skeletons has been from above and behind, so I'll carry on the same here. As I've already done a layer of Reikland Flesh Shade on the Retributor armor, I'll begin the highlights again just with Retributor armor on its own. So I'll start off working fairly large, and then as we add more silver to it, we'll get smaller and smaller. So the way that I do this is just to hold it so that you're looking down from where the light is going to come, and then just paint all of the area that you can see, and the bits that you can't, just leave because that's the shadows. Right, so that's the Retributor armor done. So now we'll start working in some Mithril Silver and brighten up these highlights. And what we'll do is just, as we're getting lighter, we'll work in smaller and smaller areas. So we're kind of just working the centre of the bit that we just painted. Add in some more Mithril Silver. Work in the centre of that again. So we're just reinforcing the highlight and getting smaller and smaller as we get brighter. This works perfectly on this as it's round, so the top of it is going to be brighter anyway. So even just doing the quick highlights like that make it look more cylindrical. Now for the final highlight, it's just going to be pure Mithril Silver. And this final highlight is just going to be a line right down the centre of the highlight area. So that is our final highlighted horn. As I said, these aren't going to be competition standard, so I'm quite happy with that, so I think I might just leave it there. So the next step, we're going to tackle these rings, and what I'm going to do with them is just do lead belcher straight over that. I've moved the light so I can actually see what I'm doing now. Got to make sure I keep it in camera so you can actually see it. Bear with me, I'm learning. I'm a messy painter, so I'm taking my time on these bits, making sure that I don't go onto the main belly of the horn that I've already done. I am by no means a speed painter. I think it's looking pretty decent so far. I mean, it's definitely much higher level than what I would have done with my old skeletons. As I said, I'm a messy painter. I don't know if that's sharp, but I've already just gone over the edge on that bit, so I'll have to do some touch up and re-highlight that area. Right, I'll just touch up that little bit and then we'll see how we're looking. Right, so this is how we're looking after the bands or rings are done on the horn. I quite like it like that. So what I'm going to do now is use the mithril silver just to highlight them, and I'll do that just very simply, just a little bit of edge highlighting really. So just in the same areas where the other ones are, side of your brush, just on the very top of it. There you go, just a very subtle highlight on them ones. There you go, I'm happy with how that turned out. That's the horn done, so now on to the next step.
Now that the musician's horn is finished, I'm going to batch paint the rest, starting with the blue fabric. So for the blue fabric, I'll be using a base of Thousand Suns blue, and then I'll be layering up Araman blue and mixing that with Corax white for the highlights. I'll also be using a wet palette which I got for Christmas. Be my first time using that properly, so looking forward to that. Right, let's get started with the musician. blue fabric parts and the helmets are all now completely painted. So now it's time to move on to the leather parts, which I'm going to be doing red. So I'll be doing a base of corn red and then just adding in some wraith bone to do the highlights. The red leather parts are all painted now. So next up I'll be moving on to the metallic parts. For the steel type parts, I'll be using lead belcher as a base, and then I'll be highlighting using mithril silver. I will also be shading using Reikland Flesh Shade, as that's the only brown type shade that I've got at the moment. So I'll be using that to create kind of rust effects. That's all the steel parts done on the figures now. I did a base coat of lead belcher, then a Reikland Flesh Shade, another coat of lead belcher just on the highlights, and then a second layer of Reikland Flesh Shade, followed by highlights again of the lead belcher, and then final on the brightest highlights with the mithril silver, just to get a nice layered and really dirty aged look to all the metal parts. Next up is the wood, and then we're on to the final part, which is just the gold bits. For the wooden parts, which is mainly just the shafts of the spears, I'll be doing a base coat of Rhinox hide, a mid highlight of Scrag Brown, and then a final highlight of Kislev Flesh. I've finished the wooden parts on the figures now. As I said before, I used a base coat of Rhinox hide, and then I did the highlight just thinned down Scrag Brown, and then I dry brushed over the whole lot, just going vertically to create a kind of wood grain just with the Kislev Flesh. It's not very noticeable, but it just adds that extra little bit of dimension to it. So next up is just doing the little gold and brass details on the figures. They've got parts of the sword, and also some of them have arm rings that I'm going to be doing. I've finished doing all the little gold and brass details now. So next step is to paint the inside of the shields and get them attached. The backs of the shields are now painted and attached to the models. For the red parts of the wood, like painted wood, I just used corn red, and for the metal I just used lead belcher, and then just went over both of those colours with the Reikland Flesh Shade. So next up I'm going to do all the little detail parts that I've got left, so just the hair on this one and the horns on that one and that one, and then that'll just leave me, and the flight on the arrow that I've put in the skeleton skull, and then that'll just leave me with the outside of the shields, and then they'll be complete. I've finished painting the shields and the feathers for the flight on the arrow, and also the horns on the helmet of the champion and the one over just on the left here. For the shields, I just painted them the same as before. So it was corn red for the base, and then I just mixed in some wraithbone with that for the highlights. The metal was lead belcher and then highlights of mithril silver. The brass was retributor armor, and then that was then gone over with Reikland Flesh Shade and then dry brushed for the highlights with mithril silver. For the arrows on the flight of this guy, with the arrow going through his skull, I did a base of Scarsnit green, and then went over with Biltan green just to bring out the details of the feathers, which I don't think will be picked up by the camera at the moment. Apart from that, I have repositioned some of the shields and the arms, and also the one holding the banner, I've put his front foot on top of a couple of rocks because he wouldn't stand up. Repositioning the arms and shields means that I can fit them all together as a unit like this. So now all that's left to do is to do the basing.
after all this time, I can finally say that they are complete.
It took me 14 months to finally get around to finishing the painting of this unit and 4 months to finish editing this video. I hope you enjoyed watching the journey of getting these done. Thanks for watching, like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.